guys, my name is Grace. I am an adult services librarian at the Grandview Library. So I usually work upstairs in the computer area, but I also work in the fiction department and sometimes down in the basement. And I'm here today to talk about some books I've read recently that I really enjoyed. We're here every Thursday talking about some teen books that we recommend. We also have a book talk for younger kids on this same Facebook page. And if you head over to our regular Grandview Facebook page, we also have adult book talks every Wednesday. So something for everybody. I have 4 books for grades 4 through 6 today and 4 books that are sort of more for grades 7 through 12. I'm going to dive right in. The first book that I have for grades 4 through 6 is actually a graphic novel. It's called The Time Museum by Matthew Liu, and I really like the style of this one. It's got sort of a fun fantasy element, so they can go kind of crazy with it. But the story is Delia Bean. She's the main character there in the front, and she and all of the other people in the background there are recruited to become interns at this place called the Time Museum, where they sort of go and capture different things from different places and different times. They can time travel to do this, and they're competing with each other for this position. So they're all going out on these missions, and they have to sort of figure out if it's better to work together, to compete against each other. They try both ways. Some things work, some things don't. And they see some crazy stuff because obviously they're bouncing through time, which is really cool to see all these different kind of historical pieces come together. They see everything from dinosaurs to actually stuff from the future as well. So yeah, this was really fun. I think it's got a sequel, or at least one other, because it sort of leaves off at a really good cliffhanger. And so if there's not one already, it's got to be coming. But again, I really liked this one. There's his name there, by Matthew Liu, The Time Museum graphic novel. The next book I have is called Wink by Rob Harrell. This one's sort of based on a true story, Rob's true story actually. So the main character is named Ross, sort of based on Rob, and he is in middle school, and unlike other middle schoolers, he has had to have an eye removed. He has a tumor, cancer, and he's trying to fight that. But he doesn't feel like he's fighting anything. It's just this thing that's happening. And at the same time, it's tough because his friends don't exactly know how to react. They don't know how to be his friend right now because they're worried, they're freaked out. It's just really hard for everybody, but it's even harder when he doesn't have his friends there. So at first, he's really struggling with this. It's obviously a lot to take on, but then he actually, befriends the radiation technician, that he's going to see every week, and he forms a rock band. I mean, he learns how to play the guitar, and then he's writing his own comics at the same time. So it's this really intense story that has these really fun elements, and he's going through all these changes, but he sort of starts to realize that the change isn't a bad thing. Obviously, there's some scary things, but he lightens it up with these comics that he writes about this character, Bat Pig. And at the same time, like I said, he's forming a band. He's making friends with people he never thought he'd be friends with. This was a really inspirational story. I really enjoyed it. It was a really good reminder, too, that, even when things are hard for someone who's going through something, it's hard for the people around them. That's no excuse to not be there for them, but it was just, you understood why everybody was kind of struggling with what was going on. It was just a lot of tough stuff, but that's what happens in real life. So it felt really, really, really realistic. You could tell that Rob was speaking from experience when he wrote a lot of the stuff in this book. So I really enjoyed this one, Wink by Rob Harrell. The next book I have is called 5 Things About Ava Andrews by Margaret Dilloway. And I really liked this book because I could relate to it a ton. Ava Andrews has severe anxiety, and that's, a big part of her life, and that's what a lot of what happens in the story is based around. She has anxiety, and she has a pacemaker because she has a heart condition, which obviously makes her more anxious, and then she's anxious about being anxious, which is a total thing. So it's sort of her understanding her anxiety, not overcoming it, but coming to some new realizations about it, and at the same time trying to help the people around her to understand her in a different way. So she actually joins an improv group, which is not something you'd expect from someone who has such anxiety, but she does, and it goes really well. Her parents are surprised, her therapist is surprised, but it helps her sort of find her voice. There's no wrong anything in improv, and that alleviates a lot of her anxiety because there's no messing up. So she sort of comes out of her shell a little bit. She makes some new friends. She figures out how to speak up a little bit more. And so then when the theater that they have their improv classes at is closing, she and her friends figure out how to use their voices to fight for that place that's really important to them. So I really liked this book. Like I said, I could relate to it. I think a lot of people probably can. Her anxiety is really intense and severe, and a lot of the things she describes, I knew exactly what she was talking about. But even if your anxiety isn't quite so strong, it's a really it's just really easy to understand why some things were harder for her than maybe some people might think they would be. So yeah, I really liked this book. I know I keep saying that, but it was great. That's a good recommendation. The last book I have for grades 4 through 12 is called Maybe He Just Likes You by Barbara D. And this is about Mila. She's in middle school, and all of a sudden one day the boys are sort of treating her differently, and she is really uncomfortable with it. One boy tells her it's his birthday and asks for a birthday hug. She does it, but she feels really weird about it. Another boy comes over and wants to like touch her sweater, just on the sleeve, but she's uncomfortable with that too. It starts to make her feel weird about her body and about just her relationships with people. And at the same time, the girls that she's friends with, rather than feel like the boys are being weird, they feel like she's being weird, even though she's uncomfortable. And they just kind of keep saying, maybe they just like you. You might be uncomfortable, but maybe they just like you. And that doesn't feel okay to her. And the number of times that you sort of hear someone belittle her feelings makes you realize how many times this happens to people around us, because I've heard people say some of these things to people. I've had people say these things to me. I remember middle school being just like this. I know I'm a lot older than a middle schooler now, but this book really, it hit home on how a lot of things kind of are. So this is a great book for boys or girls to read. Girls, because it's a reminder that you do not have to put up with something you're uncomfortable with. Maybe you're comfortable with some of the things that she experiences, and that's okay. But if you're not, that's enough it should be enough to shut it down. And if you need to find a way to do that, you should do that. Communicate with somebody or ask for help. She finally does, and some things come of that. And for the boys, things that might seem funny or just playful, maybe they're not. Maybe somebody's really uncomfortable. And again, the boys in this book sort of start to realize that as they're put in her shoes a little bit. So this book was really, really powerful. It was really well written, but it was really relatable. And it's probably something that a lot of families maybe would like to read together to be able to talk about some of the things that are in this book. Okay, so the first book that I have for grades sort of 7 through 12, older kids in this age group, this is called Honor Girl, and it's by Maggie Thrasher, and it's actually a memoir. So Maggie is also the main character. She is at a summer camp. She's in high school at the time, and it's a Christian girls camp. And while she's there, there's a camp counselor who's very close to her age. She's just a couple years older, but she is a counselor, and Maggie starts to have feelings for her. And she's struggling with what that means. She's struggling with understanding who she is, and at the same time struggling with how other people will perceive her, because it is sort of a religious camp. She knows that it will not be well received if she has a relationship with a girl. She has heard people say things. They actually say things in this graphic novel to her, and it makes her feel uncomfortable. It makes her kind of feel some shame. It makes her very anxious and hesitant. It's not exactly a happy story, but it was a really good story. I'm going to show you the drawings too, because the style is very relatable. I feel like a lot of people have sort of tried to draw things in this same style to show how they feel about things or their perspective on the world. And it all comes down in this story to voting on something they call the Honor Girl, which they think is... they vote on this person every summer that represents the camp, and that's sort of what the Honor Girl position is. And usually it's somebody that Maggie isn't really interested in being friends with. She represents sort of this girl that Maggie can't relate to. And so Maggie has to sort of understand how she fits into a camp where this is the pinnacle of being, a camper, and how people seem to want to strive towards this, but at the same time, she doesn't think it's all good. So it was, like I said, it's not a happy story. It doesn't have a happy ending, but there's a lot of growing that happens here for Maggie very quickly. And it definitely was sort of, it was a reminder of how much of a struggle somebody can go through, even when they're not speaking about any of it, just kind of what's going on inside of them, because she doesn't communicate a lot of this stuff except through this book. So I feel like this book was really powerful for her to write, I think. I actually have one more graphic novel for this age group. It's called Mooncakes, and it's written by Suzanne Walker, and it's illustrated by Wendy Shu. And it's about Nova and Tam. These are the characters here on the front. Nova is the witch, and Tam she's a werewolf. She's got little ears. I don't know if you can tell. And they've been friends for a long time. They grew up in the same place, and Tam moved away with her family. Nova still lives in town with her 2 grandmas. She's sort of an orphan. There's layers to that you'll see. But she lives with her grandparents, not her parents, and runs a bookshop for witches. And witchcraft in this world isn't it's not exactly secret, but it's out in the open. People know about it, but it's not something that everyone's encountered. So Tam actually comes back to town. She's trying to defeat a demon who can only be defeated with werewolf's powers, like when they change at the full moon. So she comes back to do that. It doesn't go according to plan, and she turns to Nova and her grandmas. And while they're sort of figuring out how to defeat this demon, Nova and Tam remember that they have feelings for each other, and those feelings are sort of reawakened, and it's this really great love story. Not a love story, but a romance. And they're fighting this demon, and it's this sort of fantasy, with all this crazy stuff happening. So it was really, really good, really well illustrated. I really liked the style of it. You definitely got the feel for everything that was happening along the way. They used a lot of different colors depending on the type of scene that's happening. Like I could imagine this as like a Netflix show. So it was really, really good. Mooncakes. And I don't know if there's a sequel yet, but I'm kind of hoping there is one, because I really want to hear more about these 2 characters. This book is this might be a 5-star review. I loved this book. It's called Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. And it's about these 2 characters kind of on the front. You have Penny and Sam. And so Penny she's just moved to Austin, Texas. She's going to college there. She's about an hour away from home. She was so excited to leave home. Her mom drives her crazy. She's a single mom, but she's also like a hot mom. So she's kind of always attention seeking. She dresses really inappropriately, according to Penny. That's Penny's description of it. But she needs a break. So she goes to college, and she's living with her new roommate, and her roommate is kind of related to this guy, Sam. And so they meet, and her roommate doesn't want them to be friends. She's like, hands off, no way, Jose. So they run into each other, and naturally something happens. She sort of, not rescues him, but he's having a really hard time, and they become each other's emergency contacts. So it's all about just sort of get home safe. Yep, cool. They text each other, super short and sweet. And then it evolves into something else, and they're texting all the time. They are telling each other things that they've never told anyone else. They're opening up to each other in a way they've never opened up. And they start to have this really intense relationship, but it's a really good relationship. I mean, it's really, it was really beautiful to read and watch, especially via text, because it felt really authentic. But at the same time, like I said, they're revealing things they've never shared. So I will throw a content warning out there that Penny has experienced a rape, and she sort of describes it to Sam, and she describes it in the story as well. But the way that it's handled is really great. Sam's handling of it and the descriptions, etc. I mean, it makes it very relatable, and you're able to understand how she's sort of moving through, coming to terms with what's happened to her, whose fault it is, which is not hers, and some of those sorts of themes. But it's really about her and Sam. That's what the relationship is. That's what the story is. And one thing I really like about this book is that it's written from both of their perspectives. So throughout the book, each chapter goes back and forth from Penny to Sam, Sam to Penny, and they just sort of, it's from each of their perspectives, and you even see the same conversation in text happen, but from both perspectives. So in one chapter, you'll read these kind of text messages, written like text messages, and you'll read the same thing in the next chapter, but you're hearing inside of Sam's head instead of Penny's, and vice versa. So this was really, really good. I highly recommend this book. I'm going to tell everybody about it. That's why I'm telling you guys about it. So Emergency Contact by Mary H.K. Choi. And the last book I have was another amazing book, but definitely, so I'm going to throw content warnings all over this. It's called Sadie. It's by Courtney Summers. And this one is, it has some violence, and very specifically, it has some sexual violence against children. Sadie is, she's the victim of a pedophile, and her sister is as well. And so she's sort of on this mission to get revenge for her sister who's been murdered. But her history comes up an awful lot. And some of these experiences sort of shaped her. So it's from the beginning, it's something that you just need to be aware as part of her story that you're going to hear about. But Sadie grows up really rough in a trailer in Colorado. Her mom is an addict and eventually leaves. She raises her sister, and her sister's 13, she's 19, and her sister is found dead. So that's all really terrible, and like out of the gate, we have these bad things happening. But it's really interesting because you have the story from Sadie's perspective kind of throughout the novel, but at the same time, you also have this man who's doing a podcast, basically. Imagine like a true crime podcast about Sadie and her sister, and it's called The Girls. And so you have the whole story that Sadie's telling throughout the novel, and then each chapter right behind her is this guy who's sort of investigating, and he's trying to figure out what happened to the girls, specifically Sadie, because they know that her sister Maggie was murdered. They don't know by who, but they know that she was murdered. They don't know what's happened to Sadie yet. So they're trying to figure that out. You're sort of figuring it out as we go, hearing from Sadie's perspective. But she's on this mission, and she's making it through what she wants to do here. But you don't really know where it's going until the very end. And at the same time, you're right behind the whole time because this podcast narrator is doing his best to keep up with her, but he just can't. So it was powerful. It was sad. It was beautifully written. I mean, it was so descriptive. Every tough thing that she went through, at least, was you felt like you were there. This was a really good book. And actually, I listened to part of it. I was reading it and listening to it when I needed to as well. And I wish I would have listened to the whole thing because it was narrated with a full cast, which isn't something you hear very often in an audiobook anymore. But every character had a different actor. So the voices didn't sound, not that they sound silly when someone's reading all the voices. Some actors are really good at narrating an audiobook, but it felt like you were listening to a real podcast. He would interview people she had encountered on her journey, and they all had actual real actors' voices. They all sounded different, so it felt really realistic. So if you're looking for a good audiobook, this would be a great one because it was performed and produced so incredibly. Like I said, a full cast is an unusual thing in an audiobook nowadays. And this one, it was kind of meant for it. It was really well done. So Sadie by Courtney Summers, a really intense, powerful, sad, but really good book. Okay, so those are 8 books for this week. Again, we'll be back next Thursday with 8 more books. If you're looking for specific recommendations, give the library a call, stop in. We're happy to recommend some specific titles for you. And we hope to see you soon. We're open 6 days a week. Stop by and see us whenever you'd like. Thanks.